Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet. All Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. Bitcoin not zero. We have a great episode for you this week. Matt Pines, Executive Director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, will join us. I'm here at the Ronald Reagan Building inside the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C. for the third annual Bitcoin Policy Summit. It's been a crazy event with many senators and Congress people and business people. And I gave a speech here earlier called History is Longer Than You Think, and we'll run that speech at the end of this episode. But we talk with Matt about everything going on in Bitcoin policy, what the summit has been like, what kind of growth they're seeing, and his expectations for the rest of the year in Bitcoin policy world. And of course, we'll check in with our good friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always, to talk about markets. Whipsaw over the last week with the U.S. bombing Iranian nuclear sites, taking Bitcoin down to 98.5, but then rallying back now as we record this on Wednesday, June 25th. Bitcoin at 107, so we're kind of right back in that range. Things are looking relatively strong now with the purported ceasefire between Iran and Israel. You know, even if it doesn't hold, the markets, I think, sense that the worst is behind us. Before we get to all that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let's hop right into it with Beimnet Abebe. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're in New York. I'm in D.C., but it's been quite an exciting, in terms of the markets, I guess, like 1 week or so? I mean, the Israel had been striking Iran for 8 days or so. Then the U.S. on Saturday bombed the 3 major nuclear sites with the B-2 bombers. And since then, President Trump has said, although it's not clear if it's totally working, that there's a ceasefire agreement in place or something. Over the weekend, Bitcoin dumped to like 98.5 from like the 110 range previously. But as we record this on Wednesday, June 25th, Bitcoin trading at 107. So kind of recovered. What's your takeaway from the weekend's activities and the market reactions?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was a classic buy the rumor, sell the news type of event. And, typically, U.S. markets have tended to fade war headlines at a quicker pace than, previously. And so, I just think that there's a lot of fear and angst built up going into the strikes, what the retaliation was going to look like. Is there potential for escalation? And long story short, we got an outcome that essentially removed a left tail risk for markets, and therefore, markets rallied. Given you're kind of removing like the worst case scenarios, and that's brought Bitcoin with it. I think the illiquid move that you had, over the weekend of the strikes, was simply a function of the illiquidity. Liquidations going through over a weekend. And now you're at the point in broader markets where, it seems like rate policy is going to be easier than what folks expected. The ceasefire is generally constructive. We'll see if they abide by it. But even if they don't, it kind of seems like, the worst is behind us. And generally data is okay. So a lot of things working in risk's favor. And that's why, stocks are essentially at all-time highs once again. And the old adage, nothing ever happens, seems to be holding. But underneath it, though, there's still some interesting developments, I would say, right? Like the thing that I kind of focused on this week was all the pressure that Trump kind of is putting on Powell and the Fed to cut rates. You had a couple of governors come out a little bit more dovish.
Yeah, it was Waller and somebody else.
Correct.
People were saying maybe those guys
are buying. For
just like Fed chatter. I mean, they can also just intellectually have the view that it should be dovish. That's fine too. But yeah, what's your take on that?
So I mean, I think it undermines the credibility of the Fed as a independent agency. And, over the long run, I think it sets a bad precedent of the executive branch being involved in kind of monetary policy decisions on an explicit basis. I think historically there've been, lots of coordination that we probably don't know about publicly. But the explicit, kind of relationship is the one that's a little bit concerning from a credibility standpoint. But yeah, I mean, Lutnick's piling on the pressure. Like basically anyone that's a talking head on TV is piling on the pressure. And I just don't think that the office of the Federal Reserve kind of, deserves that, because they have done a fantastic job, over the past couple of years. A handful of mistakes here and there, but all else equal, they've done about as well as, that they could have. Anyway, so I think shadow Fed chair potential, Fed firing is a super important, development to kind of focus on. The other thing is, the trade deadlines are approaching. Most of the trade deadlines are in early July. And so you might see more focus on trade negotiations, the ones that are going well, the ones that aren't. But again, it kind of seems like the market's kind of willing to overlook pretty much anything at this point. And yeah, and I think the backdrop for crypto is going to remain constructive as long as broader risk remains constructive. We've seen a ton of corporate treasury buying over the past couple of months, and it doesn't look like that's going to stop anytime soon. And the corporates are now not just in the U.S. but abroad as well. So it kind of seems to be kind of like a global push to have more treasury Bitcoin companies. And I think that'll just continue to push BTC higher. And I wouldn't be shocked if you got a Bitcoin all-time high in the next couple of weeks.
There you go. Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, thank you for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go to Matt Pines, Executive Director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Matt, welcome back to Galaxy Brains.
It's great to be back. And thanks again for coming to this 100-degree heat in DC for our Bitcoin Policy Summit.
We're at the BPS, the Bitcoin Policy Summit, hosted by the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Yes, coming on Galaxy Brains actually means me grabbing you to come into a side room for us to talk. What is up with the event this year? I'm seeing like 1,000 people here. It's at least triple the size of last year. Mm-hmm. Why is that? And what's going on?
I mean, the meme is memeing. So we started this concept of a Bitcoin Policy Summit in DC in the months after the collapse of FTX, with the basic idea of saying Bitcoin is real. It's not going away. It's not dead. It's a serious issue. We're going to bring Bitcoiners to DC to dress in suits and talk about it like it's a serious policy subject.
Yeah.
And it turned out that's a thing that people are interested in. But we had 100 and some people the first year. Second year, we doubled. Now we've basically, tripled from last year. And so it's really exciting to see, folks like yourself and a wide swath of the industry, folks from government, folks from think tanks, folks representing, essentially policy expertise on all these different areas of Bitcoin: human rights, national security, financial inclusion, regulation, policy. We've got senior politicians. It's just the vibes are extremely high.
They are high. You had Senators Blackburn and Lummis were early in the day. I saw Congressman Richie Torres, Majority Whip Tom Emmer, many others. It is not a niche issue, is it? I mean, it was. You guys kind of memed this into existence, like you said, because it really was just a couple hundred people at the National Press Club. Now we're in the World Trade Center, Ronald Reagan building, giant auditorium. Is Bitcoin policy, is it working? I mean, are we getting what we want from government now?
It's hard to say, right? Like, we are on everyone's mind. And I think our objective is to pull Bitcoin out of the larger conversation around digital asset regulation, in which it's a critical component. But the framing that we're trying to bring, not just to the summit, but to our larger work, is broadening the view of Bitcoin as not just a niche digital asset policy subject, but as a subject that is going to drive a lot of strategic decision-making across not just the US government, but other countries in the next few years. And trying to steer around those corners and paint a picture of the future where Bitcoin is a digital gold and it's integrated into national balance sheets, integrated into sovereign wealth balance sheets. That may seem speculative today, but we're seeing the early signs that this is a not implausible scenario. And we do policy. Policy is about national decision-making, especially in DC. And these governments, these administrative agencies have to make plans over the long term. And so you want to ask questions not about what's happening today and say Genius Act regulation passing through the Senate and maybe getting to negotiate with the House or market structure bills. It's what is the government's relationship to Bitcoin, this emerging hard asset, but also a global network, going to be over the next 3, 5, 10 years, where Bitcoin can do Bitcoin things. And so I think we are changing minds. I think a lot of folks are now waking up to the seriousness of this issue. The first year that we did this, it was, I think, a lot of surprise looks when we saw a bunch of Bitcoiners in suits and not hoodies. And that doubled down last year. And you saw a packed room, National Press Club, senators walked in the room and they just sort of looked at the room and they're like, oh, there's actually a lot of people here.
Yeah.
Serious people wearing serious clothes, talking about Bitcoin with serious intentions. And I think we've just 10x that today.
Yeah, we have. And even I wore a suit this time, which is shocking. I think it was the first time my viewers ever seen me in a suit.
Clean up well.
Thank you. And, President Trump, when he was on the campaign trail, pledged to make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world. And you're talking about thinking long term here, and there's a lot of ideas and policy. So are we still in the formulation phase of these big policy ideas, or how far along are we after the first 6 months of this new administration to getting to the Bitcoin superpower? Like, we're still in the early stages, right?
Yeah, I would say my honest assessment is we're seeing a bit of a gap between rhetoric and action, right? We've had some very positive, very welcome rhetorical shifts, and obviously relief from outright aggression and attacks on the industry. And so just that government pivot from being anti-Bitcoin to being pro-Bitcoin rhetorically, signing an executive order, establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, labeling Bitcoin digital gold, calling it a strategic asset that we intend to hold and not sell in the nation's holdings. That is a very significant move. But on the scheme of sort of what's possible, right? I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
And so I think we're encouraged by the progress to date. It's only been, less than 6 months, right, since this administration came into office. And so I'm expecting to see, continued momentum, but it requires work, right? A lot of things can happen. You can have wars. You can have, changing of political priorities. And so our focus is to make sure that Bitcoin is centered in that conversation as lots of, things kind of come in and out of the primary view of policymakers on stablecoins, on market structure, on reconciliation and budgets and defense packages and things that just continue to occupy time. And Bitcoin doesn't have a board of directors, doesn't have a CEO, doesn't have a lobbyist crew, and so it's easy to get people to say good things about Bitcoin and kind of treat it as like the second or third priority. But does that mean it actually becomes their first priority?
Yeah.
And that's kind of our objective, is to constantly maintain attention and focus on Bitcoin and broaden the aperture of ideas, like with BitBonds as an example. Like we did our Bitcoin for America sort of forum earlier this year, pulled that together pretty quickly. Similar concept, very much more focused and smaller scale. But that was about laying out a little bit more concrete ideas on the table. Like, what does it mean to be a pro-Bitcoin government? What are some outside the box policy suggestions that, folks inside the Treasury Department, as an example, should consider? And I think until you put it on the table, no one's going to look at it. And so you got to put it on the table, you got to write the white papers, you got to present it as a serious concept, and then it's out there. And then it can either, live or die on its own merits. But I think that's the function of BPI, is just to expand the Overton window of about the larger strategic view of Bitcoin, and then to fill in, right, walk through that window with, a bunch of white papers.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest priorities policy-wise now that BPI, mentioned BitBonds, talk about the SBR a little bit. Are those top of mind? Is something like the BRCA to protect developers? Like, is it all of it? Like, what are some of the concrete policy items that BPI and Bitcoiners want from government?
Yeah, I think there's it runs the gamut, right? There's some lower hanging fruit things that I think are essential on kind of just the ethos and value of the technology itself, right? So the right to develop and use non-custodial tools, not being labeled a money transmitter, not being prosecuted for using open and developing open source software. So that's the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. That's a critical priority of ours. We want to strongly advocate for that. We've had Matt Corallo on stage here. We've had Richard Torres, Davison. We've had lots of folks kind of now understand this is a critical priority for Bitcoiners and for the larger industry, and understanding the values that are at stake here and the freedoms that we think this technology instantiates. So that's a critical priority. The SBR obviously is a main priority of ours, and articulating a strategic logic for that and laying out a case for why it's a critical thing that we understand and take action on, and not just, sort of treat the executive order as a one and done, but actually codify and expand that in law. The other is de minimis, tax exemptions for using Bitcoin in everyday payments. right? And having that be something that allows Bitcoin to flourish in its original use case as a peer-to-peer cash system. The other is just think about the intersection of Bitcoin mining and AI, right? Mm-hmm. Bitcoin mining is a key component of this technology that actually has deep connections to our physical infrastructure and is intersecting with this rapid disruption coming from AI on our grid. And so there's large policy questions about how to craft the right form of energy regulation, technology regulation, Bitcoin regulation that allows us to take the maximal advantage of all of these different trends, right? Making sure that we stay on the cutting edge of AI. We allow Bitcoin mining hash rate to be successful in developing onshore and accelerate the development of our energy system from top to bottom. And I think there's a lot of interesting crosstalk that's happening here and will be happening tomorrow as well between energy regulators, large utilities, AI stakeholders, politicians, Bitcoin mining companies. That hasn't really happened before. Yeah. And I think these are all areas like Bitcoin is a prism that connects lots of different policy areas. And it's not just domestic, but it's also overseas, right? Thinking about how Bitcoin is going to intersect with stablecoins in a global system. If we pass something like the Genius Act and we allow an offshore crypto dollar system to flourish, you now have mobile wallets in dozens of countries connecting billions of people that they're now able to plug in to these digital networks and essentially opt into a digital money system that's essentially this fusion of the hardest money on earth, Bitcoin, and the most trusted kind of unit of account, which is the US dollar. And I think those work to our national advantage and also work to the advantage of those populations which are facing inflation and expropriation and instability. And so these were niche conversations, niche sort of topics 2-3 years ago. Now they're front and center.
Well, large part due to your work at the BPI, and just congrats on an amazing summit. I can't wait to go back and watch the panels that I've been out here for. You guys have a big thing? What else you have planned for the year? Is there anything huge coming up?
Oof, well, this is the big one. This is the big kahuna every year. So far we've done this big summit in DC. We're going to go back into the kitchen. We're going to start cooking. We're really excited to have the partnership with PubKey.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to be opening up what I would call, maybe not so tongue-in-cheek, a Bitcoin embassy, a decentralized Bitcoin embassy. We don't speak for Bitcoin, but our objective there is to kind of bring DC to Bitcoin and Bitcoin to DC. And so we're going to have our offices located inside a PubKey bar and restaurant downtown DC. So the vibe, just that is like impossible to think of as a real thing. And we'll be hosting regular events, programming, discussions to try to further the conversation. I'm also going to be digging deeply into some of these more, I think, important emerging topics in Bitcoin, Bitcoin and quantum computing, Bitcoin and AI, and Bitcoin and sort of geopolitical change as like 3 thematic areas that I think we need more research on. And I think the larger community, we need to put pen to paper on kind of what's the space of possibility here, right? Where do we think these changes are going to go? How fast? What are the implications for Bitcoin? What are the implications from Bitcoin to those other topics? And we're going to be expanding our fellowship program. And we're just all things are moving very fast, and it's an exciting time to be at BPI.
Well, bullish BPI and bullish, I guess, suit corners. Bitcoiners in suits.
I'm not tied up.
I know we're looking here.
My neck is getting a little chafy. It's only been a few hours.
Well, Matt Pines, Executive Director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, thank you for the time on Galaxy Brains. And I guess everyone check out btcpolicy.org. Lots of great research there. I know Matt's published some things there that are really good on Bitbonds, the SBR, on how Bitcoin's being used to help people in the world. What an amazing thing. You guys have tripled or quadrupled from just last year, this event. So congratulations and thank you for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for your support, man. You've been great.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you to our guest, Matt Pines, Executive Director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and our good friend, Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, everyone have a safe and happy weekend, and stay tuned now to hear my speech from the Bitcoin Policy Summit. Wow, I see a lot of friends in this room. It's great to be here. I see some enemies too, though. Keep your heads on a swivel, you guys. The world is always changing, right? But that change is rarely peaceful. Human progress doesn't glide forward on consensus. It lunges forward violently, disruptively, unapologetically, on the back of revolutionary ideas. And Every time that happens, the establishment, the status quo, the powers that be, try to kill it. The establishment tells you, we've already figured it out. Relax. There's nothing new to learn, nothing new to invent. Everything is fine just the way it is. The elites, the entrenched interests, the status quo, they want you to believe that nothing will ever change. It's all been figured out. Systems are secure. But I'm here to tell you, don't buy the hype. Every innovation is disruptive and flies in the face of that lie the system always wants to tell you, that everything is in its right place. History tells us a different story. From the wheel to the web, from the printing press to the microchip, the ideas that truly change the world always begin on the fringe, misunderstood, mocked, dismissed, suppressed. Galileo looked to the stars and saw a truth that made Earth move, literally. The establishment shackled him to his home for the rest of his life. Tesla lit up the world with alternating current, and Edison spent millions to bankrupt him and ruin his reputation. Da Vinci spent decades designing flying machines, but yet never published his more than 500 designs for fear of ridicule. He died believing the world wasn't ready, and he was right. But eventually, we flew. And when ARPANET connected research labs in 1969, it was a military experiment, clunky, academic, a footnote. 30 years later, one of the world's top economists still said, 30 years after the internet was invented, one of the world's top economists said it would amount to little more than a fax machine. But today, we know the internet is like oxygen. These critics, they weren't stupid. They were entrenched. And entrenched interests don't lead revolutions. They defend the status quo. It's not just that ideas get suppressed, though. Moments get missed. Even when history shifts beneath our feet, we don't always realize it. For example, in 1944, leaders gathered at Bretton Woods to design a new monetary order. Few then grasped that they were enshrining the dollar as the global king. In 1971, when the US depegged the dollar from gold, it was presented as a temporary fix. But that moment shattered the last connection to hard money and ushered in the fiat era we live in today. Here's the truth. No global leader alive has governed under a hard money standard. Not one. Every institution we take for granted, from fiscal policy to central banking to global trade, is built atop an assumption that money is elastic, manipulatable, and controlled by governments. Bitcoin breaks that assumption. Like all revolutionary ideas, Bitcoin disrupts, not by accident, by design. Bitcoin threatens rent seekers, middlemen, gatekeepers, authoritarian technocrats. Of course they're fighting it. Of course they're scared. Of course they want to co-opt it or minimize it or put it in a box. Because when you build something that matters, the pushback is the point. Big decisions often reveal their magnitude only in hindsight. And I promise you, Bitcoin will be one of those. I leave you with this. History is longer than you think. The world has not always been the way that it is now, and it will not remain this way forever. The illusion of permanence is the greatest lie the status quo ever told. And the status quo is as much people as it is a thing. Do not mistake stability for stasis. The truth is that things do change. They always do. And disruption, it's not a side effect of innovation, it's the purpose. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email. read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.